Welcome to Politics Now, where we interview newsmakers and our leading politicians. And today we have the senior senator from the state of Nevada after only 2 years, Catherine Cortez Masto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Steve.
You've got a lot of accomplishments, a lot of bills and things that you've introduced in the first 2 years. Let's talk about a couple of them right off the bat. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is eliminating a rule that governed the amount of interest that could be charged on those payday loans that sometimes can be as high as 300%. People have to take second loans to deal with that. You've written a letter that asked them how they went about changing the rule. Do you think there's any way to reverse that?
Well, yeah, there's a way to reverse it. What I've seen, though, in the challenge, and as you know this, as Attorney General, during the crisis, when the CFPB came into existence, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, it was a great partner to address all of our financial challenges that we were seeing from predators, right? Financial institutions, or even some of the payday loans, not all of them, but some of the payday loan companies. So the CFPB, rightfully so, working with the AGs, but they went out, did a comment period, they studied payday lending, they wanted to make sure that individuals who needed that quick cash because of a dire consequence, we're going to get sucked up into this kind of unfortunate vacuum where you're always trying to catch up to make the payment and the interest keeps going. We have seen that here in the state of Nevada. If you recall, I believe it was when Barbara Buckley was Speaker, and we were trying to address all of the predatory payday lenders that were out there. So we had some great laws in the state of Nevada. Unfortunately, the CFPB, when they passed that legislation or that rule, which was great, that was under the previous administration. Under the current administration, they've put people in place who now want to implode the CFPB, who want to take back all those rules, do away with everything, and open it up again. And my concern is, listen, the rule that was implemented went through a comment period, went through hearings, everybody got to weigh in, including the payday lending companies, because there's some legitimate payday lending companies out there, but there are many that prey on individuals. And if you're an individual and you need that money because you're in dire consequence, financial need right away. You need maybe the $100 or $500. Unfortunately, you get sucked up where you're having to catch up, and then your interest is increasing, and then you're trying to catch up and pay that bill, and you never catch up.
It's a spiral. You never. It's
a spiral, and so we wanted to stop that, and that's the reason why the rule was there.
And you're asking for the research, if any, that went into justifying the rule.
Not justifying the rule, justifying why they rolled back the rule.
Right, exactly, why they're rolling that back. You would probably be unsurprised to find that there may have been no research, right?
Well, exactly. So what I've seen, and so I sit on banking and housing, and Mick Mulvaney, in particular the Treasury that comes before us, and I've seen Mick Mulvaney, who was the acting director of CFPB, right? Who's now the acting director, that chief of staff, right? Who was head of OMB. Literally, when he came in, he started undoing all of the rules without any hearings, without any discussion. He didn't agree with CFPB. He didn't agree with what they had done in the past. So he was just going to undo everything that had been done.
So why not, instead of trying to expose the fact that there may not have been any justification for this, why not pass a law that caps interest rates in general in loans? Say 36%. That's it. Nobody can charge interest higher than that, and problem solved.
Yeah, because to pass a law, I need my Republican colleagues to support it.
And
right now, there's a challenge there, because unfortunately,
that would not pass, you think?
Right now, in the Senate, Republicans control. And when you control the agenda, you control which legislation is even heard. Mitch McConnell would never hear anything like that. And we've seen already what he has allowed on the floor of the Senate and what he hasn't, and that's been our challenge all along. That's why we keep pushing it.
Would you support a bill like that?
I'd have to take a look at it to see.
Anti-usury type law?
Yeah, I'd have to take a look at the specifics of it, but I understand what the intention is, and absolutely agree with the concerns. But I want to say the specifics and work through that. And the intent is to work with everyone and not just pass legislation because you believe it's the right thing to do without having the hearings, without having the debate, without hearing from everybody within the industry and everybody else who's affected by the rules. That's the intent. That's what we do, and that's why I supported the CFPB ruling when it first was implemented.
Recently in Washington, D.C., there has been government shutdown, longest in history. That was ended with a bill that you supported that was a compromise bill that funded the Department of Homeland Security, had some funding for a border wall, not as much as the president had requested, and certainly not as much as he had rejected in an earlier compromise offer. So the president, immediately after that bill was signed, well, first let me ask this. There were several Democrats that voted against that compromise bill. Many of them happen to be running for president. Do you think they were wrong to vote against that?
I can only tell you from my perspective. Listen, and think about this, this is legislation we actually had already passed last Congress. We'd already passed these bills in a bipartisan way. The House did, we did. And then it went to the president. So what you saw us, what we passed was something we'd already done. We went through this whole process because the president disagreed with how we appropriated funds to shut down the government and hurt federal workers. We saw the implications, and that was only 25% of the federal government that was shut down. And you see how people rely on the federal government and the workers as well. I think it was outrageous. I don't think that in our role that we engage in debate in policy on the backs of federal workers. We don't hold them hostage. That's not what we should be doing in good governing. So I supported this legislation, not only because it opens up the government. We are providing, rightfully so, funding for border security, which I've always supported. Because of my role as the Attorney General and working on the border with my colleagues at the federal level and state level, both here in the United States and in Mexico.
Do you think a wall would be ineffective? Do Democrats oppose the wall? Some say it's immoral, some say it's too expensive. Do you think it would be an ineffective way to accomplish border security?
Yes, and I know that, and because of my work down there. When I was Attorney General here for 8 years, I made it a point of working with the Western Attorneys General on the border to address issues like human trafficking, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering that crosses the border because of transnational crimes. We established relationships with the AGs in Mexico to address those concerns. And I can tell you, the 8 years I was there, to finding solutions to addressing that type of crime that's crossing the border, not one time did a border wall come up, because it's not effective. Because what we did in this funding is what we have, and I have learned from being on the border and talking with individuals, is you need money to go to the technology that's needed, right? To strengthen our ports of entry where all of the drug trafficking is coming through. You need the new technology, the drones, the technology that's going to be able to absolutely address and find the drugs that in the vehicles, right? The machines. We have,
because many of those come in through ports of entry.
That's right. And here's the other thing that we all know, and you can Google this and see. We need drones and we need technology on our planes, the LiDAR technology, because they're tunneling under, right? So these tunnels that I have seen in the past by these transnational crimes, these tunnels are solar powered. They have high technology, and they're using tunnels. So we need the technology.
So even traffickers are worried about global climate change.
I guess you could say that. But we've got to be smart about it. And every law enforcement that I have talked to over the years, as I've worked on this as the Attorney General, it was making sure the money's directed into that technology, into strengthening our ports of entry, into doing everything we can to stop that illicit drug trade, and the human resource that's needed as well.
The president, immediately after the bill was passed, he signed it, but he said, I'm not happy with this compromise, so I'm going to declare a national emergency. I'm going to take money that's been previously appropriated for other projects by Congress, and I'm going to use it for a border wall. Now, you have a bill that would address that. You have a bill that would prevent him from taking that money from those other projects and using it for the border wall. Well,
here's the thing. Just because you disagree with our constitutional function, which is to appropriate funds, just because you didn't get your pet project as a president, you don't get to go around Congress. That's constitutionally, there are separation of powers. There's things that we are required to do. We appropriate the purse strings, and then he implements and moves forward and executes on that in the administrative executive branch. Because he disagrees with how we appropriate doesn't mean he gets to declare an emergency that he has manufactured. It's outrageous to me. And I think that is, to me, this is not only about a misuse of funds and trying to redirect the funds. You're taking those funds away from where we have appropriated in a bipartisan way the need for those funds for military projects, right? That are going to go to not only our military installations for housing and other needs. There's projects that are going to come into our states that's necessary for important, whether it's wastewater or flood control, you name it.
Do you know if any Nevada projects are jeopardized by that emergency?
That's what I'm inquiring now. Right now I have my staff looking at the specifics because I haven't seen yet from this administration, they haven't put anything out specifically what would be coming into the state. I know not only am I, but my colleagues like Senator Tim Kaine has done the same thing. I think we're all concerned where this money's going to come from. And it's kind of crazy. What I've seen from this administration, the money's going to come from our military, which we've already appropriated the funds for specific projects, and it's going to come from law enforcement who's already engaging in stopping the illicit drug trade that's going on.
Now, the argument you're making now is an argument for legislative prerogatives, and normally you would expect lawmakers of both parties to be jealously guarding their legislative prerogatives. That was a key assumption under the Constitution's separation of powers. But there is a law, the emergency power statute. Is it time to change that statute in light of this? I think maybe even some Republicans would see the danger of a future Democratic president taking appropriated money and using it in ways it was not intended in the future. Is it time to change that statute?
I think it is time to take a look at it. You know, this is going to be fought in the courts. The courts are going to determine whether that 1976 Act is it has enough information in it to indicate the intent of Congress, which was, the intent of Congress was to give some authority to this administration to declare emergencies. We've seen that on foreign affairs issues, on natural disasters. That was the intent. The intent of Congress was not to allow the President of the United States, just because he was unhappy with how we appropriated funds on a project that he cared about, that he manufactured, quite frankly, to take that money and declare an emergency for it. So we are going to have to see, and I say that because it'll play out in the courts. The courts will do an interpretation of that 1976 Act. If the interpretation is that it needs to be narrowed and further define the authority that we are giving to the president because it's too broad, then we're going to have to address that, definitely.
One more question on President Trump. As you said, you were an AG for 8 years. You were also a federal prosecutor. Do you think that there are sufficient grounds under the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office, as the former acting director of the FBI said was discussed by the acting attorney general at the time? Yeah.
First of all, let me just say, I think obviously it is an important reason why we have the 25th Amendment, and individuals prior to me being in Congress felt the need, and rightfully so. I think we have to have all of the information and evidence and facts to make that determination. I'm not purview to all of that, so I don't know. But if there are others out there that have concerns that want to make it transparent or bring that forward, then they should.
Did you see that interview on 60 Minutes?
No, I didn't. I was actually yesterday at a dinner for the 100 Black Men gala that were honoring incredible women leaders here in the state of Nevada, and here in Southern Nevada particularly.
Did it when you heard the revelation, did it surprise you that those discussions had been had? Because that is a fairly significant discussion to have among a cabinet member actually considering invoking the 25th Amendment. It happens on TV shows all the time, but in real life it's never happened before. I have seen some comments come out from Rod Rosenstein discounting some of that. So somewhere there's a truth in there. I don't know. But listen, we have seen for the last 2 years people questioning the authority of this president and how he is pushing the envelope, undermining our rule of law, questioning our freedom of speech and the press and the freedom of the press. Every time he doesn't get what he wants, he challenges us as wrong and thinks that there should be some retribution. I think it's crazy to me. Now more than ever, we should be standing up to protect our institutions, to protect our branches of government, and making sure there are those checks and balances. You have a bill recently. The state of Nevada, as you know, passed a gun background check bill. It's been debated in terms of legislation and a voter initiative for about 6 years. Finally passed, signed into law last week by the governor. The House of Representatives has an act. You actually have the Background Checks Expansion Act in Congress that you have co-sponsored. The thinking is that probably the House bill will pass the House because there's a Democratic majority, but as you said, you need your Republican colleagues to work with you in the Senate. What do you think the odds are that either your bill or a House bill on this will pass so that the entire country can have the same rule that's going to be in place here in the state of Nevada?
Yeah, you know what's crazy about all of this, Steve, is a majority of Americans, like a majority of Nevadans, think that this should be done. I mean, it's just common sense, universal background checks. It's not taking away anybody's Second Amendment. It's just making sure that we're not putting guns in the hands of terrorists or people that are felons or mentally ill. I mean, it's just common sense. So yes, you know, we are still working. I have faith that it will pass out of the House. I'm hoping that puts leverage and more pressure on my colleagues in the Senate to do the right thing here and listen to the American public. But again, it comes down to Mitch McConnell controlling the agenda, and he can decide whether he wants something on the floor of the Senate or not, and he can choose that if this isn't something that he supports for, which I have seen, political gain, that's not going to happen, unfortunately. So, but here's what can happen, and that's why I've been working so hard with my colleagues. I know after being there just a short period of time, whoever is in control controls that agenda. So if we care about gun legislation, that's common sense. If we care about climate change and the environment, if we care about good paying jobs and growing our economy, then we need people that are willing to bring it to the floor of the Senate and debate it. And to me, that's why I think I am looking forward to the Democrats taking back control of the Senate. There's a reason why we need to have that happen just so we can move forward on some of these issues. We've seen with the democratically controlled House what they've done already.
Yeah.
And so it's important to have that
and
debate.
You kind of have a role in that, right?
I
You
do.
are head of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. Your job is to go and recruit candidates. You recruited a real superstar in Arizona recently with Mark Kelly, the astronaut and the husband of former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. Do we have are there other people of that caliber? It's going to be tough to top that one.
I will say this, you know, I'm respecting the privacy of individuals they're talking to because they've got to make that determination ultimately themselves. But let me just say this, the energy is there. I mean, there are people that are coming forward that we have never seen before that are interested in running for the first time because they feel out of a sense of just of their country and what they believe in the wrong direction this country is going, that they need to stand up. And it's fantastic. We saw that in the last election. We are going to see that moving forward, I think, in this upcoming election. So I'm excited about the people we're talking to. There's a lot of energy. We are playing in states right now where my colleagues, Republican colleagues in the Senate who are up for re-election, some of them are vulnerable. And so there's a good shot at right now that I feel comfortable that we have an opportunity to take back.
It'll be tough to top Mark Kelly. Is Tom Brady a Democrat? Have you asked him? I'm kidding. We won't out him. I'm
not going to talk about anybody that we were talking to.
Recently, you and all of the Nevada delegation raised objections when the administration, which was fighting in court over a shipment of plutonium, confessed to the court, and I use the word confess because it almost sheepishly said, oh, by the way, Your Honor, we've already sent that shipment of plutonium to the state of Nevada. It's there now. That was something that the state had strong objections to, and I know you have fought Yucca Mountain. This was not Yucca Mountain. This was the Nevada National Security Site. But are you worried that more shipments may come? There's a lot more plutonium that needs to be temporarily stored while they get its final resting place ready to go. Are you worried that Nevada is going to receive those shipments and no one would ever even tell us?
Yeah, let me just say this. I'm concerned under this administration that they're going to do everything they can without talking to us. We've seen that, not only when it comes to Yucca Mountain, but the shipment of plutonium. That's why the delegation, we are all united in fighting this and holding them accountable. I had them in my office with some members of our delegation questioning the folks with the Department of Energy and NNSA. We went into a classified briefing, and the full delegation was there questioning them. And these are some of the questions we asked them. We didn't get specific answers, but I can tell you we are going to continue that oversight. The next step for, I think, many of us is to go out to the site and see where this plutonium is being stored, how it's being stored, and continue the discussion on how much longer it is going to be in our state. Yeah. And to the extent that their intent is to move any more of it here, we're going to be questioning that and following it. And from my perspective, I sit on the Department of Energy and Natural Resources. We have oversight over the Department of Energy. I'm going to use every tool and resource that I have to hold that agency accountable, make sure they're coming to talk with us. You know, the tragedy in all of this was, I believe it was in 2014 that Governor Sandoval, and I remember this, Governor Sandoval put together a working group with the folks at the Department of Energy and NNSA, concerned about what was happening at the test site, trying to develop good working relationships so we can be candid with one another, we can talk with one another, and kind of
and wasn't that in consequence of a shipment of low-level waste
That's
to the
right.
site? Okay.
That's right. And so, and unfortunately, under this administration, they completely ignored that working group, stopped working with them, and then breached that trust. And let me just say this, it was so offensive on so many levels to me, not only the fact that they just ignored Governor Sandoval and breached that trust and stopped communicating with him, but as an attorney who has appeared in so many courts, in federal court, for somebody in the Department of Energy, for their attorney to go into court and not tell the judge the true and accurate information under the guise that we were going to continue down a hearing is outrageous to me.
I mean, how have they not made a motion to hold the government in contempt?
Yeah, I know I've talked with our governor and our current attorney general, and they are moving forward on the appropriate actions to take to hold this administration accountable.
Because the federal government controls the highways, it controls the waste, it controls the land on which it's being stored. Is there anything the state can even do to stop it? Can the state have any legal or otherwise? I know Oscar Goodman used to say, I'm going to lay down on US 95 so it can't come this way. But if they don't tell you, it could be happening as we speak right now.
Well, that's the point. And I think that's why there's a role for us to play at a federal level, the delegation working with the state. We have oversight over the purse strings for that agency.
So you could deny them money to transport the waste?
Absolutely, and question it. I actually have appointment authority for all of those Secretary of Energy as well as the management level, and I can object to anybody being appointed.
Have you done that? Have you?
Oh yes,
okay.
yes, yeah. And I want them to come and work with us. And so, not between my role in senior senator now and working with Jackie Rosen, with Dina Titus in a senior position in Democrats in control of the House and that delegation, we have a great working relationship to continue to apply the pressure using every tool and resource we have at our federal level to hold them accountable and force them to come in and work with us and our state.
I know you've got a busy day here, so just one last question. I meant to ask this earlier when we were talking about guns. You have co-sponsored a bill that a lot of people say is a long time coming. It would allow the Centers for Disease Control to study gun violence as a public health issue.
Right.
Surprisingly, to many people might be surprised by this, the CDC is currently prohibited from doing that. They are not allowed to do that research. What do you expect will come from that research that might result in some kind of policy changes?
Yeah, I think with anything, it starts with the data. If we're going to find solutions to some of the issues we're dealing with, it starts with the data. Let's research. Let's find out what's going on there. What does that data tell us? And then from that data, and that's why I'm a big proponent of data analytics, because I think that's where everything should start, then we learn how to craft legislation after having a full debate on it and hearings that really solves the problem that we're trying to address. In this case is the reduction of gun violence in this country. It's not about taking away somebody's Second Amendment right. Listen, I'm born and raised here. I have members of my families who are hunters. My father was a hunter, aunts hunters, uncles hunters. We are gun owners. My husband's retired federal agent. It's not about that. It is about knowing, as whether you're a gun owner or not, that there are common sense common sense solutions to addressing and reducing gun violence in this country. And if we can save a life, if we can, through those solutions, prevent the next massacre from happening, whether it's in our state and in any other state, then we should be looking at how we do that. It starts with that study. It starts with the CDC, and that's really, for me, the most important part of all of this.
And obviously, we don't know what's going to come out of that research now. But would you imagine that it would make recommendations in terms of things like background checks, or in terms of things like more quickly reporting mental health adjudications to the NICS database, things of that nature?
Let me give you an example. When I was here as Attorney General, as you know, I addressed domestic violence and reducing domestic violence. There was a study done by the Violence Policy Center around domestic violence and how identifying the states where there's a high level of domestic violence. In Nevada, we were always in the top 5 for domestic violence, unfortunately. But they also looked at the tools used in domestic violence. The number one, unfortunately, weapon that was used against a victim was a gun. And from there, after seeing that study and understanding it, as Attorney General, that's when I put together a task force to understand the deaths that were occurring in our state and how we can do a better job of addressing it. I also worked to ensure that we were shoring up and tightening the restrictions when it comes to access to guns for those that are mentally ill, those that are felons, or somebody who is convicted of domestic violence. I think from that data and that information, you can craft good legislation after debates and hearing, and everybody has an opportunity to weigh in to reduce the violence, and that's what this is about.
And the law to include in background checks, people who were subject to orders of protection to either prevent them from purchasing weapons or to surrender weapons that are already owned.
Absolutely, that's
came
where it
out of
starts.
something like that.
That's right. That's right, and that's where the data, why it's so important.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Catherine Cortez Masto, the senior senator from the state of Nevada. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you come back soon.
Thank you, Steve.
Great.